plague that felled empires, a fever that rewrote cities, a parasite nearly erased by kindness and clean water. Why do history's worst outbreaks end with unexpected hope? Stay with me, and I'll guide you softly through 100 devastating plagues and the quiet lessons they left behind. You are in a small Italian port city in the year 1347. A ship docks quietly, its sails tattered. But it brings no spices, no wealth, only a cargo of death. Within days, people start to cough, swell, and fade into the silence. A strange blackness seeps beneath their skin. And from that moment, the world begins to change. The Black Death moved like a shadow across Europe, carried by fleas on rats, yet felt in cathedrals, villages, and palaces alike. No one could see it, stop it, or name it. It came from below, from within, from afar. Doctors wore long-beaked masks filled with herbs. Bells rang from wagons, and still, prayers rose into the sky like incense. In just 4 years, over 25 million lives vanished. Entire towns emptied, leaving only wind and grass. And yet, the world survived. Poetry was born in the ashes. Laborers rose to power. Humanity, humbled, kept walking forward. Isn't it strange that, out of so much stillness, the Renaissance quietly followed? And tonight, as you listen, perhaps you'll remember. Even the darkest plagues eventually give way to light. Imagine the scent of incense in a Roman bathhouse, the echoes of sandals on marble, and a cough that doesn't stop. The Antonina Plague arrived with Roman troops returning from the east. At first, it was a whisper, a strange fever, a red rash. But soon, that whisper became a roar. Homes were sealed. Temples burned candles all night, and emperors prayed, just like soldiers and farmers did. Some called it smallpox. Others called it divine punishment. But whatever it was, it carved a path through the Roman Empire, taking emperors, generals, even Galen, the great physician, who chronicled its symptoms helplessly. Over 15 years it claimed 5 million souls. Markets stilled. Armies withered. And slowly, the mighty empire itself began to stagger. Yet here's the paradox. In this chaos, Christianity spread. The sick were cared for. The forgotten were noticed. Empathy became a quiet revolution. So while the world of marble cracked, something invisible began to grow, something tender. Strange, isn't it? How even plagues can plant the seeds of belief. You are now walking beneath the golden domes of Constantinople. The sea breeze carries the scent of olives and salt, and something else, more sour, more still. It is the year 541 CE, and Emperor Justinian, at the peak of his ambition, suddenly watches his capital fall silent. This plague, believed to be bubonic, swept in from Egypt, crossing trade routes like a wind. It started with swollen glands and chills, and ended in mass graves. Reports said 10,000 people died in a single day. The markets closed, the ships were halted, and the great cathedral echoed with only the footsteps of mourners. Even Justinian himself fell ill, but survived. Still, his dreams of restoring Rome faded. The empire would never be the same, but here's the thought that lingers. Amid decay, the city's mosaics glowed brighter than ever. Icons, faith, and candles persisted, even as the world dimmed. And sometimes it is not strength, but survival that becomes the most remarkable miracle of all. Hey, friends, imagine this. A high plateau in central Mexico where the maize fields shimmer in golden waves, and the air holds a quiet unease. In 1545, an unknown illness swept through New Spain, today's Mexico, with ferocity. It was called cocoliztli, meaning pest in Nahuatl. But it was unlike anything the people had ever seen. Blood-red eyes, vomiting, sudden collapse. It wasn't smallpox or measles. Europe had already brought those. This was something else. Within a few years, millions of indigenous lives were lost. Entire villages turned to silent ruins. Spanish settlers were largely spared, leaving the native population to wonder, was this a punishment from the gods or a poison in the wind? Modern scholars still debate the cause. Maybe a hemorrhagic fever, maybe climate-fueled bacteria. But the loss? That part is clear. And yet, even through that sorrow, Nahuatl poetry survived. Songs of water, earth, and spirit passed down in whispers. You see, even when voices fall silent, stories can carry the breath of a people. Dear listener, dim your lights, and let's take a journey across the 19th century's growing web of railways and steamships. It's 1852, and cholera has returned. Not for the first time, but with a vengeance. This was the third global outbreak, but perhaps the deadliest. From the banks of the Ganges to the foggy streets of London, it moved swiftly. The symptoms were cruel: severe diarrhea, dehydration, collapse. In some places, death came in hours. In London alone, thousands perished in weeks. But amidst this panic, something quietly revolutionary occurred. Dr. John Snow removed the handle from a water pump. Yes, just a single handle. But it changed everything. By mapping the outbreak and identifying contaminated water, he shifted medicine away from superstition and toward science. It was the first breath of modern epidemiology. So, the cholera story isn't just one of suffering. It's also one of clarity, courage, and data. Funny, isn't it, that a simple pump on Broad Street became the turning point of a plague. You are now standing on cobblestone streets beneath Strasbourg's cathedral. It is July 1518, and something strange is happening. A woman begins to dance, alone. Then another joins, then 10, then dozens. They dance through the day, through the night. Some collapse from exhaustion. Others simply don't stop. This wasn't a celebration. It was something deeper, darker, a plague of motion. No one knew the cause. Some blamed overheated blood. Others pointed to divine punishment. Bread mold, stress, mass hysteria. Theories still swirl like the dancers did. City leaders even hired musicians, hoping to cure it with harmony. But music only fed the frenzy. By the time the dancing stopped, several had died from sheer fatigue. No one fully understood it then. We don't, even now. But isn't it mysterious that sometimes the body speaks when the soul cannot? And maybe, just maybe, some plagues wear shoes. Hey friends, take a breath. You're walking along the Thames, the air thick with smoke and stillness. It's 1665. A red X is painted on a wooden door. Beneath it, the words, "Lord, have mercy." This is London's Great Plague. Another surge of bubonic terror. It came quietly but quickly, spreading through poor neighborhoods, then into the wealthy ones. The dead were counted by the thousands, by week, then by day. Plague doctors in beaked masks walked like ghosts. Families were locked inside. Silence ruled the city. But in the stillness, something remarkable happened. A young Isaac Newton, far from the chaos, watched an apple fall and began wondering why. The city would recover, but not without change. And so, even as carts rolled through the fog and doors were sealed with prayers, the laws of gravity were being born in a quiet orchard. Somehow, even in plague, the world kept spinning. You're now stepping into a sunny park in 1940s America. Children laugh, ride bikes, drink sodas through paper straws. But behind the laughter, something silent looms. Polio. Each summer brought waves of fear. Pools closed. Parents whispered warnings. Hospitals filled with iron lungs. Metal chambers that breathed for paralyzed children. There was no cure, only hope and careful avoidance. But then came Jonas Salk. Quiet, serious, meticulous. In 1955, he announced a working vaccine. Streets erupted in celebration. Church bells rang. Children were lined up, not to be isolated, but to be immunized. The air changed that day. Fear dissolved into gratitude. And so, the story of polio is not just about a disease. It's about collective courage, and the day the world remembered that science could save. And, perhaps, that even the scariest summers can someday feel safe again. Dear listener, take a seat near an old samovar and listen to the soft whistle of the tea kettle. It's 1889, and something new is spreading, faster than anything before. From Russia, through Europe, into the Americas, the Russian flu. Trains and steamships helped it move, tools of progress becoming bridges for disease. The illness came with fever, fatigue, body aches. At first, it seemed familiar. But doctors noticed strange neurological effects, brain fog, depression, even hallucinations. It may have been the first true influenza pandemic, and its echoes are oddly modern. Even after recovery, many felt different, changed, not quite the same. It passed, of course, as most plagues do. But it left behind questions and a strange new awareness that health isn't just the absence of illness. It's a balance, fragile, delicate, deeply human. Maybe that's the real lesson it left behind. You are standing on a hillside above Athens. The Parthenon glows in marble light. Democracy is young, the city vibrant, but war and illness loom. In 430 BCE, a mysterious plague struck Athens during its war with Sparta. People crowded behind city walls, and the sickness spread like wildfire. Thucydides, the historian, caught the illness and survived. He described fevers, ulcers, blindness. He wrote not of heroics, but of despair. People abandoned rituals. Burials were rushed. Leaders died, including the wise Pericles. And yet, through all this, Athens did not fall. It reeled. It mourned. But its legacy endured. Even now, you can walk those same hills and imagine the echoes of courage through grief. Sometimes, resilience is simply choosing to keep telling the story. Hey, friends, close your eyes and picture a vast continent, green with forests and ancient cities of stone. In 1520, smallpox arrived in the Americas, carried not by warriors, but by breath. The Spanish conquest had begun, and with it came a disease unknown to the native world. No immunity, no remedies, no names for it in Nahuatl or Quechua. In Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztecs, people fell ill in waves. Boils covered the skin. Fevers raged. Entire families were lost in days. Even the Emperor Quitlawak died, his rule barely begun. In just a few years, nearly 90% of the indigenous population across the Americas vanished, not just from smallpox, but from measles, influenza, and sorrow. Temples became ruins. Cities returned to the earth, but songs, languages, and resistance endured, quietly, stubbornly. And while the disease reshaped a continent, the spirit of its people whispered through generations. Even now, you can feel it in the rhythm of a drum or the rustle of maize in the wind. You are now walking through Tudor England. The air smells of damp wood and wool cloaks, but something unnatural is brewing. They called it the sweating sickness. It came swiftly without warning. You'd feel fine in the morning, feverish by noon, and be gone by nightfall. Sweat poured from the skin. Hearts raced, and death often came within hours. No rash, no cough, just terror and a strange, sticky silence. It began in 1485, shortly after Henry VII took the throne. Some said it was tied to the Battle of Bosworth. Others believed it was punishment or poison. It reappeared in bursts, 5 major outbreaks over 70 years. Nobles fled cities. Monasteries locked their gates. Yet no one ever solved its mystery. And then it disappeared, just as suddenly as it came. Even today, no one truly knows what the sweating sickness was. Hantavirus? Anthrax? A strange strain of influenza? The mystery endures, like a chill in the corner of a warm room. Sometimes the plagues that vanish leave the deepest echo. Dear listener, take a slow breath and imagine the wind blowing across frozen hills in northeastern China. In 1910, the Manchurian plague began in Harbin, a city of railways and furs. Hunters had brought marmot pelts into the city, unaware that the animals carried pneumonic plague, a version deadlier than its bubonic cousin. Unlike other plagues, this one moved through the air, from lungs to lungs. It spread in crowded trains, markets, inns. Within months, it reached multiple provinces. Entire neighborhoods were sealed off with wooden barricades. But something changed here. Dr. Wu Lien-te, a Cambridge-trained physician, arrived and introduced a radical idea: cloth masks. He also enforced quarantines, cremations, and lockdowns. And they worked. In less than a year, the plague burned itself out, but not before taking over 60,000 lives. Dr. Wu's methods would become the blueprint for future outbreaks. Sometimes the quiet hero wears not armor, but linen, and sometimes healing begins with a single breath behind a mask. You are now entering a stone village under a twilight sky. Bells ring softly, not to call prayer, but to warn. Unclean, unclean. Leprosy, now known as Hansen's disease, wasn't the deadliest plague, but perhaps it was the loneliest. In medieval Europe, those afflicted were cast out, forced to wear bells, live in colonies, and announce their presence from afar. People feared contagion, but more than that, they feared the appearance, the skin lesions, the numb limbs, the disfigurement. Yet the disease spread slowly, and, unlike myths claimed, it was not easily transmitted. Most people were immune, but stigma, once ignited, spread faster than any germ. Some leper colonies became peaceful havens, gardens, music, quiet prayer. Others were places of abandonment, Over time, science caught up. Leprosy became treatable, then curable. But even now, in corners of the world, the stigma lingers, long after the illness has faded. Strange, isn't it, that sometimes fear is the most infectious thing of all? Hey, friends, close your eyes and listen for the quiet between World War I's final cannons. In 1918, the world hoped for peace. Instead, it met another enemy, one without borders or uniforms. The Spanish flu. It didn't begin in Spain, but wartime censorship hid the truth elsewhere. Spain, being neutral, reported it freely, and so the name stuck. The flu came in waves, swift, unpredictable, brutal. Unlike most influenza, it struck the young and healthy hardest. Soldiers returning home carried it to every continent, even remote islands and Arctic villages. Hospitals overflowed. Coffins ran out. Funerals were forbidden. An estimated 50 million lives were lost. Some say even more. And yet, it left behind few monuments, few statues, few songs. Why? Perhaps because the world was too tired to mourn again, but some remembered. Nurses, midwives, the children who survived and never forgot. And sometimes the silence after a pandemic is louder than the storm itself. You are standing at the edge of a bustling port in southern France. Ships sway in the harbor. But one, recently arrived from the Levant, carries more than silk. It's 1720, and the Great Plague of Marseille is about to begin. Despite quarantine rules, city merchants pushed to unload the ship quickly. Trade was too valuable. Within weeks, the city choked on disease. It was bubonic plague again, swollen glands, fever, collapse. But Marseille's walls couldn't contain it. Over 100,000 people across Provence would die. Bodies were buried in mass pits. Streets were fumigated with burning herbs. The governor stayed, coordinated efforts, and even dug graves himself. And slowly, the city recovered. This was Europe's last major outbreak of bubonic plague. And maybe its lesson is this: sometimes, ignoring a whisper can summon a scream. Dear listener, picture a Roman city beneath a scorching sun. The fountains run dry. The streets are hushed. In 250 CE, during the reign of Emperor Decius, an outbreak swept across the empire. Fever, throat sores, diarrhea, blindness. The bishop Cyprian described it all. That's why we call it his plague. It wasn't named after him because he caused it, but because he noticed. While many fled, Christians stayed. They tended to the sick. They buried the dead. They whispered prayers not just for their own, but for strangers. Pagan writers noticed this too. They wrote not about sermons, but about kindness. The plague claimed thousands, but in its wake, compassion quietly grew. And sometimes, in the shadow of death, the soul becomes visible. In the early 1980s, a strange illness appeared in young, otherwise healthy men. Pneumonia, Kaposi's sarcoma, sudden weight loss. Doctors were puzzled. Fear grew. Soon, the virus had a name, HIV, and the syndrome it caused, AIDS, spread globally but not evenly. Some communities bore more pain and more silence. At first, there was stigma, shame, political avoidance. People wore gloves to shake hands. Entire funerals were avoided. But then, resistance, activism, science, art, people demanded answers, demanded care. By the mid-90s, treatments were found. By the 2000s, new diagnoses dropped in many countries. And still, the virus remains, but so does hope. Tonight, remember this. A pandemic doesn't end only when the virus fades, but when dignity returns. You are now walking through the red earth villages of Sierra Leone and Liberia. The sun blazes, but the streets are quiet. In 2014, Ebola returned. It had appeared before in small outbreaks, but never like this. This time, it spread to cities, to hospitals, to homes. Bleeding was rare, but fever, vomiting, and internal collapse were not. The mortality rate was over 50%. At its peak, health workers struggled. Some died. Fear spread faster than the virus itself. And yet, local volunteers rose. Burial teams formed. International aid poured in. Vaccines were tested. Entire communities changed behaviors overnight. Hugging, touching, mourning, all suspended. The epidemic ended, but scars remain. Still, what lingers isn't just sorrow, it's strength. And perhaps resilience is choosing to touch again after so long without. Now picture London again, 1854. Cobbled streets, children playing, a single water pump on Broad Street. When cholera returned, no one was surprised. But one man, John Snow, was ready. He mapped the deaths, methodically, tenderly, and traced them all back to that pump. He removed the handle, and the outbreak slowed. It was a quiet act, unseen by most, but it changed public health forever. From that single moment, the idea that clean water could save lives spread faster than the germs themselves. And maybe, just maybe, progress begins with noticing where people drink. Hey friends, take a slow breath. We're in the tropics now, where mosquitoes hum softly in the dusk. In 2015, a wave of concern swept across Brazil. A mild fever, joint pain, rash. Harmless, they thought. Until infants were born with smaller heads, microcephaly. The Zika virus had crossed the placental barrier. For years, Zika had wandered quietly through Africa and Asia. But in Brazil, it collided with city heat, poverty, and a dense mosquito population. The virus spread, not just through bites, but also from mother to child. There was no treatment, just prevention, long sleeves, insect repellent, closed windows in the summer sun. The fear wasn't death. It was the unknown. What could one tiny bite do to a life not yet lived? And yet, science moved quickly. Gene sequencing, public health campaigns, international cooperation, all unfolded with speed. Within a few years, cases dwindled. But the memory lingered, especially for mothers who carried more than just their child. Sometimes the smallest things ask the biggest questions. You're now wandering through cobbled streets and Baroque domes under an Austrian sky. In 1679, the city of Vienna fell into silence. Bubonic plague returned. Its black swellings and high fevers roamed from cellar to palace. Rats scurried beneath wooden carts. Church bells tolled, then tolled again. Over 75,000 people were lost. Emperor Leopold I fled the city, but doctors, priests, and ordinary citizens stayed behind. Fires were lit to purify the air. Quarantine houses were marked. Streets were emptied, swept, sealed. And then, strangely, Vienna built something beautiful. The Pestsäule, or plague column, rose in the city center. Golden angels, swirling clouds, and a grateful king kneeling in marble. Even amid fear, art found its place. Grief became sculpture. Loss became devotion. And that monument still stands today, touched by rain, sunlight, and quiet footsteps. Because memory, too, is a kind of healing. Dear listener, close your eyes and picture a cluster of wind-swept islands in the North Atlantic. Quiet, green, remote. In 1846, measles came ashore in the Faroe Islands for the first time in 65 years. So long, in fact, that no one living had immunity. Not one. When the virus arrived, just one visitor from Denmark, it spread like wind over water. Almost every single person became ill. Out of 7,800 people, over 6,000 caught it. Miraculously, only 102 died. Why? No one is entirely sure. The islands were isolated, the people hardy, and the community tight-knit. But something else emerged too. A rare opportunity to study immunity. The Danish physician Peter Panum carefully recorded it all. His work became foundational in virology, helping future generations understand how diseases spread and fade. Isn't it something? That even from cold cliffs and coughs, science can bloom like moss on stone. You are now walking the candlelit streets of Renaissance Europe. Perfumed wigs, velvet sleeves. But beneath the silk, a new illness whispers. They called it the French pox. Others blamed Naples. Some said it came from the New World. Today, we call it syphilis. It spread rapidly through soldiers, lovers, courtesans, and kings. The first signs were small sores. Then came the fever, the pain, the madness. And slowly, a terrible stillness. Artists painted allegories of corruption. Writers spoke of moral decay. Treatments? Mercury, mostly, which poisoned more than it cured. Yet it wasn't just a tale of punishment. It was a lesson in stigma, care, and the intimate threads of connection between people. Centuries later, antibiotics would tame it. But its early chapters still echo in our understanding of love, shame, and medicine. Sometimes a disease teaches us not just how to treat others, but how we judge them. Hey friends, dim the lights and picture a crowded airport in 2002. Flu season hums in the air. But something unfamiliar is traveling this time, and severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, began in southern China, then moved across Hong Kong, Singapore, Toronto. It caused fever, difficulty breathing, pneumonia. It passed easily through handrails, handshakes, hospital gowns. The world watched numbers rise on television screens. Slowly, then suddenly. Doctors worked tirelessly. Flights were canceled. Cities locked down. Masks became normal, for the first time in the modern world. And then, with careful tracing and international effort, SARS was stopped. By 2003, it had vanished. It took fewer than 1,000 lives, but it changed millions. It reminded us that vigilance matters, that the world is small, that kindness, offered through distance, can still be love. And, in a way, SARS was a quiet rehearsal for what would come later. You're now standing outside a wooden schoolhouse in 1930s America. The bell rings. Laughter fills the air, and then a sharp cough cuts through. Whooping cough, pertussis, seemed harmless at first. just a cold. But then the spasms came, the gasps, the signature whoop. It was worst in infants. Entire families sat beside cribs, helpless. The disease didn't discriminate, but its smallest victims suffered the most. In the 20th century, pertussis caused hundreds of thousands of deaths worldwide, until a vaccine changed everything. Developed in the 1940s, the pertussis vaccine became part of the standard childhood series. Cases plummeted. Hope returned, but it's not gone. In recent years, resurgences appeared, sometimes from mistrust, sometimes from waning immunity. Still, the lesson is simple. Small protections can echo across lifetimes, and the soft sound of a sleeping baby, undisturbed by cough, is a kind of miracle. Dear listener, let's drift to early America. Horse-drawn carts, lanterns flickering. The new capital, Philadelphia, is filled with promise. And then, in the heat of 1793, mosquitoes began to bite. Yellow fever arrived. Its symptoms were sudden. Fever, jaundice, black vomit. The city panicked. Tens of thousands fled. The government dissolved. Streets emptied. But a few stayed. One was Dr. Benjamin Rush, who tried everything, from bleeding to purging, often doing more harm than good. But his heart was in the right place. Another was the Free African Society, who tended to the sick, buried the dead, and received little thanks for it. By winter, the frost killed the mosquitoes, and with it, the outbreak ended. The city survived, but it never forgot. And that's the curious thing. Sometimes the smallest wings carry the heaviest stories. You are now in a modern airport terminal. Announcements echo softly. Headlines flicker on overhead screens. In 2005, fear returned, this time through birds. H5N1, the avian flu. It rarely spread human to human, but when it did, the fatality rate was high. Governments stockpiled antivirals. News anchors spoke of mutation, of possible pandemics. Mass culling of poultry followed. Markets closed. Migratory patterns were studied like old maps. But the worst never came. Still, scientists stayed alert. They studied its genome, trained hospitals, built simulations. H5N1 was a warning bell, and while its damage was limited, its lesson was loud. The world had changed. The next threat might not knock politely, and sometimes a bird's wing beat can stir the whole sky. Hey friends, take a quiet walk through the Levant in the early days of the Islamic Caliphate. In 638 CE, near the town of Amwas, a plague broke out, likely bubonic. It struck the Muslim army hard, including many key leaders. Caliph Umar was urged to flee, but he did not. Instead, he consulted companions and ordered the army to retreat to safety. More than 25,000 lives were lost, including Abu Ubaidah, one of the Prophet's closest companions. But the moment became more than tragedy. It shaped Islamic understanding of plagues. The Prophet Muhammad had once advised, "If you hear of a plague in a land, do not enter it. If it occurs where you are, do not leave." Quarantine, written centuries before the word existed. And so, even in early times, wisdom rose like date palms in the sand. Dear listener, take a moment to imagine ancient Japan, temples in the mist, bells echoing through cedar forests. In 735 CE, a ship arrived from Korea to Kyushu. With it came smallpox. Over the next 2 years, nearly a third of Japan's population would vanish. Buddhist monks offered prayers. The emperor built great temples. Shrines were raised in sorrow. But the disease reshaped more than faith. It changed land ownership. Social classes shifted. And for the first time, the court began formal records of disease. But even through loss, beauty remained. Paintings, poetry, the soft sound of bamboo in the wind. And perhaps that's what survives best, the stillness that follows after the storm. Hey friends, dim the lights and rest your head for a peculiar story, one where time itself seemed to pause. In 1916, a strange illness emerged across Europe and North America. It began with a fever, a headache, and then an overwhelming sleep. Some couldn't wake for days. Others awoke, only to find their muscles frozen, their eyes unblinking. Doctors called it encephalitis lethargica, the sleeping sickness. No one knew where it came from. Some patients developed tremors or Parkinson-like symptoms. Others simply drifted, slowly, into a silent state, trapped between wakefulness and slumber. It affected over 1 million people. Then, as mysteriously as it appeared, it vanished. In the 1960s, Dr. Oliver Sacks famously treated survivors with a new drug, L-Dopa, momentarily waking some after decades. It was brief, but astonishing. And still, its cause remains a mystery. Isn't it curious that an entire epidemic could settle over the world like a fog and leave without a single footprint? Dear listener, take a slow breath and picture carriages rattling along Broadway. The air is warm, but something unfamiliar stirs beneath the cobblestones. In 1832, cholera reached New York City for the first time. It had traveled from India along trade routes through Europe and finally across the Atlantic. It arrived quietly, but when it struck, it moved quickly. Diarrhea, dehydration, death. Fear spread faster than facts. Immigrants were blamed. The poor were scapegoated. The wealthy fled to the countryside. Doctors tried bleeding, mustard plasters, and vinegar, but none of it worked. And yet, amid the panic, reform began. New York created its first Board of Health. Sanitation, public baths, clean water, these ideas began to root. Cholera would return again, but each time the city learned a little more. Because sometimes healing begins not with medicine, but with listening to the water. You are now stepping into a world wrapped in silence. In 1941, within the sealed walls of the Warsaw Ghetto, life became a struggle against both cruelty and disease. Typhus, spread by lice, thrived in the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions forced upon thousands of Jewish families. It wasn't just illness, it was deprivation, isolation, despair. But amid this, something astonishing happened. A secret group of doctors began collecting data, caring for the sick and documenting the outbreak, all under the threat of death. Their work was hidden in milk cans and metal boxes, buried beneath the soil. After the war, those records were found. Typhus eventually burned out. But the courage it uncovered, quiet, unwavering, burned even brighter. Sometimes the most important medicine is simply not giving up. Hey, friends, take a moment to imagine wide African plains under a copper sky. Cattle move slowly across the grass until suddenly they don't. In the 1890s, a virus crossed into Africa, carried unknowingly by Italian cattle. It was rinderpest, a disease that killed herds by the thousands. It wasn't just animals that died. The Maasai, Zulu, and other communities relied on cattle for food, economy, and ceremony. When the herds vanished, famine followed. People weakened. Societies crumbled. Some called it the cattle plague, but it was more than that. It was a quiet devastation. And yet, here's the remarkable part, it was eradicated. In 2011, rinderpest became the second disease in human history to be fully eliminated after smallpox. Because hope, like grass, always finds its way back. Dear listener, drift now to the sun-warmed alleyways of Naples. Laundry flaps in the breeze. The smell of bread and salt air drifts through the streets. But beneath it all, a hush is forming. In 1656, plague came to Naples. Likely carried on ships from Sardinia, it spread fast in the summer heat. The death toll was staggering, over half the city's population. Quarantines were declared. Entire convents were closed. The famous lazaretto hospitals overflowed. And yet, art did not pause. Painters captured saints shielding the city. Statues rose from grief. One physician, Giuseppe Bozzuto, wore a heavy leather suit and beaked mask, an image that would come to define plague lore forever. The plague passed. The city changed. But its spirit, musical, bustling, sun-kissed, remained. Isn't it extraordinary that even amid illness, the soul of a place keeps singing? Hey friends, let's travel back to the Yunnan province in China. The year is 1855, and something ancient is stirring in the mountains. Bubonic plague. It began with a murmur, rats falling silent, grain rotting. But soon the sickness traveled outward. This was the beginning of the third pandemic, a global wave of bubonic plague that would eventually spread to every continent except Antarctica. It struck hardest in India and China. Millions died. Trade routes were blamed. Borders tightened. But something else happened. Scientists identified the bacterium behind it, Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas, born of rodents. It was a turning point. Germ theory took hold. Quarantine became methodical. And so, the last great age of plague quietly gave birth to the first age of microbiology. Sometimes, even the darkest chapter turns the page toward understanding. You are now walking through warm, humid air, thick with the buzz of mosquitoes and the scent of mango trees. Dengue fever is not new. Its first records go back centuries, but in the 21st century, its reach expanded dramatically. Urbanization, travel, and climate change gave the Aedes mosquito everything it needed. Fever, pain, bleeding gums. Dengue isn't always deadly, but it can be severe. Break-bone fever, they used to call it. Millions are infected each year, and yet, for a long time, there was no vaccine. That changed in the 2010s, when new vaccines were developed, though not without controversy and caution. Dengue is still with us, but with each year, more knowledge grows. And sometimes we fight plagues not with fear, but with patience and persistence. Dear listener, drift now to the snow-covered towns of post-revolutionary Russia. Civil war raged, trains halted, food was scarce, and typhus arrived. Spread by lice and desperation, millions were affected, millions died. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Towns became still, Entire regions vanished from maps, simply lost to silence. But in the midst of it all, one voice persisted. Vladimir Vernadsky, a scientist, argued that humanity's survival depended on cooperation, a quiet idea born in chaos. Typhus burned itself out. The war ended, and Russia moved on, forever changed. Sometimes, the loudest revolutions are born of whispers in the dark. Hey, friends, you might not have heard of this one, but it may be the calmest triumph of them all. The guinea worm is not a virus or bacteria. It's a parasite. For centuries, it afflicted rural communities in Africa and Asia, causing slow, painful blisters as the worm emerged from the skin. There was no vaccine, no cure, only prevention. So, how was it stopped? By education, by filters, by watching water. Led by global campaigns and local health workers, cases dropped from millions in the 1980s to just a few dozen today. Soon, the guinea worm may become the third disease in history to be eradicated. No drama, no headlines, just clean water, patient work, and kindness. Sometimes that's all it takes. You are now walking the green hills of Ireland, but the soil beneath your feet has turned to sorrow. In 1845, the potato crop failed. Again and again. As famine spread, so did typhus, brought on by hunger, poor sanitation, and cold. They called it ship fever, as it followed emigrants onto crowded vessels. Over 1 million died. Another million left. Ireland's population never recovered. And yet, in the stillness that followed, songs emerged. Poems, stories passed from grandmothers to children. The famine was a plague of both plant and person, but from it came a deep well of spirit, and a diaspora that would carry Irish voices across the world. Sometimes even silence carries music. Hey friends, take a quiet breath and picture a Victorian nursery. Wooden toys, lace curtains, a faint scent of lavender. But beneath the softness, a fever brews. Scarlet fever swept through Europe and North America in waves during the 1800s. It struck children hardest. High fevers, sore throats, and a red rash like sandpaper. It wasn't always deadly, but when it was, it left echoes in empty cribs and lullabies cut short. Hospitals began to separate the sick. Isolation wards became common. Parents were told not to visit. The sound of footsteps in hallways became a hush of grief. And yet, from this fear came change. Cleanliness became a virtue. Hygiene reform took hold. Antibiotics, once discovered, tamed the disease. Even Louisa May Alcott's characters caught it in Little Women. It entered fiction, memory, and then faded. Sometimes, even the gentlest illnesses leave the deepest chapters in our stories. You are now drifting into the sound of jazz, rotary phones, and the turning of the television dial. In 1968, another flu swept across the globe. H3N2, dubbed the Hong Kong flu. It was fast, contagious, but milder than the Spanish flu. Still, it took over 1 million lives worldwide. It moved with airplanes and radios. Schools closed, but life kept going. Unlike other pandemics, this one stirred a strange resilience. People wore masks, stayed home, and returned quickly to rhythm. A vaccine came within months. It wasn't perfect, but it helped. And the world kept turning, one breath, one cough, one recovery at a time. The lesson: not every plague reshapes the world. Some simply remind us that care is a quiet constant. Dear listener, walk with me through rice fields under a pale moon. Frogs croak. The air is damp. In parts of Asia, a virus rose with the summer heat. Japanese encephalitis. It lived in pigs and birds, passed through mosquito bites. Most people felt nothing, but some developed fever, seizures, coma. Children were most at risk. Entire rural provinces faced waves of illness, epidemics in the 1930s, again in the 50s, then quieter but persistent. By the 1950s, Japan developed a vaccine. Other nations followed. It saved thousands. But to this day, it returns with the rains. And yet, in the reflection of water and memory, communities still build, still plant, still dance. Sometimes life carries on not despite the threat, but beside it. Hey friends, let's return to the bustling streets of early 20th century Manhattan. You smell baked bread, streetcars rumble past, and in one kitchen, Mary Mallon is washing her hands. Or not quite. Mary, an Irish-born cook, carried typhoid fever but showed no symptoms. She moved from home to home, unknowingly infecting those she fed. She became known as Typhoid Mary, the first identified asymptomatic carrier in U.S. history. Health officials eventually quarantined her, first for 2 years, then for life. Her case raised questions that still whisper today: personal freedom versus public health, privacy versus prevention. Mary didn't see herself as dangerous, but her touch became a silent link in a chain of illness. Isn't it strange that the most dangerous things can also look the most ordinary? You are now walking beside a mountain river in Haiti. The earthquake has passed. Rubble lies quiet. People gather to rebuild. And then the water changes. Cholera appeared weeks later. It hadn't been seen in Haiti for over a century. It spread fast, through rivers, buckets, bare hands. Thousands were sick within days. Thousands more would die. The source? Likely UN peacekeepers, unintentionally contaminating the Artibonite River. But even amid sorrow, something else stirred. Community action, water filters, health education, soap, and dignity. Within a few years, cases dropped dramatically. In 2022, Haiti even celebrated a full year without any. Because sometimes healing isn't heroic. It's simply persistent. Dear listener, imagine a laboratory in Hong Kong. Lanterns flickering over glass jars and copper tools. In 1894, Alexandre Yersin, a Franco-Swiss physician, examined the swollen glands of plague victims. Under his microscope, he saw something: a tiny, rod-shaped bacterium, Yersinia pestis. It was the first time the cause of plague was clearly named. Not curses, not bad air, but a pathogen. This discovery marked a shift, from superstition to science. And strangely, it was this plague that brought clarity to centuries of confusion. Yersin's name remains, so does the bacterium, but with it came vaccines, treatments, and an end to blind fear. Sometimes, naming something is the first step to not fearing it anymore. Hey, friends, take a slow breath as we wander into desert hospitals and quiet isolation units. In 2012, doctors in Saudi Arabia identified a new coronavirus, MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. It likely originated in camels. It caused fever, cough, and severe respiratory issues. Its spread was limited, but its severity was high. MERS reminded the world that new viruses don't knock. They arrive quietly. Hospitals adapted. Research began. And MERS taught us hard lessons before COVID ever arrived. Today, it's still monitored, still studied, still not gone. But perhaps that's the quiet gift of vigilance. It never forgets. You are now sipping tea under a wartime sky. Ration books, blackout curtains, quiet courage. During World War II, another illness swept England's schools. Influenza B. Milder than A, but still disruptive. It spread in classrooms and shelters. Children missed weeks. Teachers adapted. But what's interesting is what followed. This strain helped scientists understand flu subtypes, A, B, C, each with its quirks. And that understanding, born in war, laid the groundwork for vaccines used today. Even in conflict, knowledge continued, soft as a chalkboard squeak in an empty schoolroom. Sometimes, even viruses carry lessons in their silence. Dear listener, let's drift to Sao Paulo in the 1970s. Carnival music plays, but the hospitals are full. A wave of meningococcal meningitis swept Brazil's largest cities. High fevers, stiff necks, confusion, death within days. Vaccines existed, but were expensive, foreign, slow to arrive. So Brazil made its own. The country launched a massive campaign. Military trucks became clinics. Over 90 million people were vaccinated in months. It was one of the largest public health efforts in history, and it worked. The outbreak was quelled. And Brazil stood taller, knowing that sometimes you don't wait for help, you become it. Hey friends, this one is quiet, almost forgotten. In 1979, near the Aral Sea, spores escaped from a Soviet biological weapons facility. Anthrax. Dozens became ill. Officially, only a few died. But rumors linger. The Soviets blamed contaminated meat. But years later, scientists confirmed it. Accidental airborne anthrax. It wasn't an outbreak in the usual sense. But it reminded the world that sometimes illness isn't natural. It's man-made, and so, deep in a desert breeze, another lesson drifted. Some plagues don't come from rats or rain, but from silence. Hey, friends, imagine lying beneath a thin net, listening to the soft hum of insects outside. For many in sub-Saharan Africa, this is a nightly routine. Malaria isn't sudden, it's persistent. Endemic, not epidemic. Carried by mosquitoes, it causes fever, chills, fatigue. And for young children, danger. Each year, hundreds of thousands still fall to it, mostly under age 5. But this is not just a story of loss. Bed nets, insecticides, rapid tests, and anti-malarial drugs have all helped. And in 2021, a long-awaited vaccine was finally approved. Progress is slow, but it is steady. Sometimes a plague isn't loud. It's the soft drumbeat of everyday life. And yet, even that rhythm can be changed, with time, science, and care. Dear listener, step into the cool pines of the Rockies. The air smells like fir and granite. Here, in the early 20th century, people began to notice a strange fever. Aching joints, sensitivity to light, and a lingering exhaustion. It wasn't deadly, but it was strange. Transmitted by the bite of a wood tick, this virus earned the name Colorado tick fever. Often misdiagnosed, it became a curiosity for doctors and hikers alike. There's no vaccine, no real treatment, but awareness is high and prevention is simple. Long sleeves and a careful eye. It reminds us that not every sickness shouts. Some just hum in the underbrush. And isn't that what nature often does? Whisper warnings before it sings? You are now walking through the highlands of Papua New Guinea. The forests are thick. The air is sacred. In the 1950s, anthropologists discovered a mysterious disease among the Fore people, Kuru. It caused tremors, laughter, and slow loss of control. It was always fatal. The cause? Ritual funerary cannibalism, an act of love and reverence, not violence. The disease was a prion, misfolded proteins, like in mad cow disease. It traveled from brain to brain through these rituals. When the practice stopped, so did Kuru. The community adapted, grieved, and moved forward. And Kuru became one of the quietest revelations in medical history. Sometimes understanding begins with listening, not judging. Hey friends, take a breath and imagine a bright little parrot in a cage, chirping beside a kitchen window. In the 1930s, dozens of people across Europe and America fell ill with pneumonia-like symptoms. The link? Pet birds. Psittacosis, or parrot fever, was passed from birds to humans. It was rare, but unpredictable. Newspapers panicked. Pet shops shuttered. People released beloved birds into the wild. The outbreak was contained, but its legacy lingered, sparking international surveillance of zoonotic diseases. And so, in a strange way, a songbird helped build the modern understanding of animal-to-human illness. Sometimes even wings carry wisdom. Dear listener, step into a field of green pastures and lowing cattle. In 2001, the UK faced an agricultural crisis. Foot and mouth disease, a virus affecting livestock, swept through farms. It didn't infect humans, but its impact was deep. Millions of animals were culled. Countryside walks were banned. Rural tourism halted. Smoke from pyres curled into the skies. And hearts broke, not from fear, but from loss. Farmers stood beside empty barns. Children stayed indoors. A nation paused, not from disease, but from the silence that followed it. The outbreak ended, and slowly the land healed. Sometimes the soul of a place is carried on 4 hooves. Hey friends, dim the lights and picture a village in Nigeria. Roosters crow, markets stir, and life hums softly. In 1969, a nurse fell ill with a strange fever, then another, and another. The cause? A virus carried by rodents, Lassa fever. It spread quietly, mostly in rural areas. Fever, bleeding, hearing loss. Dangerous, but containable. Hospitals learned, isolation improved, and in time, treatment methods developed. Lassa hasn't vanished. It flares up occasionally, still demanding respect. But the community, the doctors, the villagers, they listen, they act. Sometimes, the best response to a whisper is a gentle answer. You are now walking cobbled streets beneath tiled roofs and bell towers. In 1649, the plague returned to Seville. It struck in summer, as many did. It took over half the city. The dead were buried in mass graves. The wealthy fled. The poor stayed. Monks rang bells and washed feet. And yet, from this stillness, art emerged again. The city mourned, but also painted, sang, rebuilt. Today, Seville's soul still hums with color and music, because even in plague, beauty lingers, and sometimes A guitar string remembers what the lungs forgot. Dear listener, follow the rustling palms to a fruit orchard in Malaysia. Bats feast above. Pigs grunt below. In 1998, a strange illness struck pig farmers. Fevers, confusion, swelling of the brain. The cause? Nipah virus, carried by bats, passed through pigs. It jumped into humans. Nearly 300 fell ill. Over 100 died. But quick action, culling pigs, closing farms, stopped it. Science moved swiftly. Since then, Nipah has reappeared. Bangladesh, India, but always met with better awareness. It's not gone, but it is known. And sometimes, knowing the forest is enough to keep walking through it safely. Hey friends, this one is quiet and heavily classified. In 1971, a research vessel sailed near Vozrojdeniya Island, once a Soviet bioweapons site. A young woman aboard contracted smallpox. Back in Aralsk, she spread it to her brother, the hospital, and more. 10 cases, 3 deaths, and a swift, secret response. It was the last known smallpox outbreak in the USSR. Vaccines contained it. Silence buried it. Today, the story whispers of responsibility, transparency, and the thin line between research and risk. Sometimes what's hidden teaches more than what's shown. You are now near the Potomac, in the nation's capital. Summer swelters. Horses clop past government buildings. In 1906, typhoid crept through the water system, affecting thousands. Not as famous as Mary Mallon, not as deadly as cholera. But important. The outbreak sparked investigations, clean water policies, new plumbing laws. It helped birth the idea of public sanitation. No one remembers the names of the ill, but their silence led to fountains that ran clean and pipes that stayed safe. Sometimes, progress is paved in the footsteps of the unnoticed. Hey friends, imagine a rolling countryside dotted with grazing cows, framed by hedgerows and stone fences. In 1986, something strange emerged in British cattle. They staggered, trembled, behaved oddly. It wasn't obvious at first, just a flicker of confusion. Then came the diagnosis: bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Mad cow disease. It spread through contaminated feed. Cows unknowingly fed the remains of other cattle. A quiet mistake with loud consequences. And then humans began to fall ill. A variant form, VCJD, appeared. Rare, but always fatal. Panic followed. Exports halted. Millions of cows were culled. But the world learned. Feed laws changed. Surveillance increased. And so, from misstep came reform. Sometimes the land itself teaches us restraint. Dear listener, pour yourself a glass of water and picture a city beside a lake, peaceful and unaware. In 1993, Milwaukee faced the largest waterborne outbreak in U.S. history. A parasite called Cryptosporidium slipped through the city's filtration system. It wasn't deadly for most, just discomfort. But for the elderly, the immunocompromised, it was serious. Over 400,000 fell ill. Boil water advisories went up. The city paused. But the response was swift. The filtration system was overhauled. Testing improved. Public health became more than just science. It became preparation. And now, Milwaukee's water is among the safest. Sometimes, purity is born through imperfection. Hey friends, picture an elegant hotel in 1976. The clink of cocktail glasses, murmurs of conversation in the lobby. And then, after a convention of war veterans, people began to fall ill. Legionnaire's disease, a strange pneumonia, caused not by human contact, but by bacteria in the hotel's cooling tower. It had gone unnoticed for decades, but now it had a name. The discovery led to changes in plumbing, air systems, and building codes worldwide. No villain, just water, air, and time. Sometimes the most dangerous guests arrive uninvited and invisible. You are now drifting into the late 19th century, a world of railways, telegrams, and top hats. Or, in 1889, an influenza pandemic swept the globe. Called the Russian flu, it may have been the first true global pandemic of the modern age. It began in Central Asia. Within months, it reached Europe, then North America, then the world. No airplanes, just trains, steamships, and the relentless movement of people. It caused fever, fatigue, and peculiar neurological symptoms. Some suggest it may not have been flu at all, but an early coronavirus. It passed, but left behind lessons in public health, record-keeping, and connectedness. Sometimes, even in 1889, the world felt very small. Hey friends, we're in a warm European summer. Picnics, market stalls, fresh vegetables. And then illness. In 2011, a rare strain of E. coli spread through northern Germany. It wasn't in meat, it was in sprouts. Small, green, innocent-looking. The outbreak caused severe complications, particularly hemolytic uremic syndrome. Nearly 4,000 cases, dozens of deaths. But here's the remarkable part. Epidemiologists traced it, confirmed it, contained it. The source was found, markets reopened, and awareness of food safety deepened. Even the smallest seed can carry a lesson, and sometimes the root of a problem lies hidden in a sprout. Dear listener, drift once more to southern France. 2 years after the Great Plague of 1720, Marseille faced a smaller resurgence. They called it the Tale of the Plague. It was cruel, swift, but contained. This time they were ready. The lazaretto hospitals functioned. Doctors stayed. The people remembered what had worked. And in that quiet response, the city showed something rare: learning. Because sometimes a second chance isn't about escape, but about action. And Marseille acted. Hey friends, imagine tundra winds, endless twilight, and snow-crusted roofs. The Spanish flu reached the Arctic in 1918. In remote Alaskan and Inuit communities, it arrived by sled, ship, and mail. Entire villages were wiped out. No immunity, no warning. Yet the survivors rebuilt. Oral histories preserved the sorrow. Traditions adapted, and future generations never forgot. In this vast silence, the flu's echo still lingers. Sometimes even the coldest places can burn with loss. Dear listener, enter the dense green canopies of Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 1995, Ebola resurfaced. It began in Kikwit, a few cases, then a few more. Hospitals were unprepared. Protective gear was scarce, but doctors and nurses stood their ground. A nun named Sister Fernanda, a surgeon named Dr. Mukwege. Names rarely known, but quietly heroic. The outbreak took over 200 lives, but it also built trust, established protocol, and planted seeds for future responses. Sometimes the battle is not won in numbers, but in memory. Hey friends, the sea breeze blows through Jakarta's markets. roosters crow in wooden cages. In 2006, H5N1, avian flu, returned. Indonesia became the epicenter. Most infections came from close contact with poultry. Few human-to-human transmissions, but each case was watched carefully. Scientists monitored mutations, prepared vaccines. Local health workers educated rural communities. It wasn't a pandemic, but it was a rehearsal. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come before the exam. You are now stepping into a moment of triumph. For centuries, smallpox ravaged humanity. Pharaohs, emperors, farmers, infants. But in 1980, the World Health Organization declared it gone. The last natural case occurred in Somalia in 1977. A single boy, cared for, watched, remembered. It took centuries of grief and 2 decades of global cooperation. Door-to-door campaigns, freeze-dried vaccines, a ring of immunity. No armies, just nurses, volunteers, clipboards. And now, smallpox exists only in laboratories. Sometimes the greatest miracle is absence. Hey friends, drift now to a string of islands floating on turquoise waters. Samoa, 1911. The ocean is still. Palm leaves rustle, but a ship docks with unseen cargo, measles. The virus spread fast. The islanders, lacking immunity, had no defense. Nearly 20% of the population passed in weeks. Whole villages quieted. Elders, mothers, infants, all gone in the blink of history. There was no medicine, only mourning. And yet, the Samoan people endured. Chants were sung. Names were remembered. Graves were tended with flowers. Sometimes, the smallest wave can leave the deepest shape in the sand, and healing, like tide, always returns. Dear listener, you are aboard a luxury liner. Waves rock gently, sunsets dazzle the sea. Then someone falls ill, and then another. Norovirus, small, fast, and stubborn, spreads like whispers through cabins, buffet lines, handrails. It's not deadly for most, just uncomfortable. But it disrupts entire voyages. In 2002, one ship reported over 500 cases. By 2014, it was the most common cause of outbreaks at sea. Now, hand washing is mandatory. Disinfectants are constant. And ship logs include illness counts. Sometimes even paradise requires precautions. And the sea always reminds us to respect the unseen. Hey friends, take a deep breath and walk with me through soaked fields in Nicaragua. In 1995, after massive floods, a spike in fever cases emerged. Farmers, children, whole villages grew weak. The culprit? Leptospirosis. A bacterial infection spread through contaminated water, often traced to rodent urine. It wasn't new, but it caught attention. Emergency teams responded. Water treatment increased. A national health alert was declared. Cases declined. Lessons were learned. And now, in Nicaragua and beyond, the link between floods and illness is part of preparedness. Sometimes, clean water is the quietest form of medicine. You are now stepping into a laboratory in Marburg, Germany. Beakers, test tubes, sterile silence. In 1967, workers in vaccine labs began falling ill. Fever, internal bleeding, collapse. It was traced back to African green monkeys, imported from Uganda. The virus was named Marburg, after the city. Deadly and rare, it would resurface in Angola, Uganda, and the DRC over the years. But it taught the world to study hemorrhagic fevers with seriousness. to respond quickly, to build containment, and to respect that sometimes curiosity must be paired with caution. Dear listener, picture narrow island roads, banana trees, and plastic buckets under tin roofs. In the mid-20th century, typhoid fevers swept through the Pacific Islands, especially in Fiji and Tonga. The disease came from poor sanitation and limited medical care. A single contaminated well could affect dozens. Public health teams responded. Latrines were built, wells cleaned, antibiotics distributed, and slowly the illness faded. Not vanished, but calmed. In that quiet success was a greater story of listening to local voices, respecting traditional knowledge, and meeting illness with partnership. Sometimes, healing is a shared language. Hey friends, this one is close. You already know the shape of it. COVID-19, a virus that brought the world to a pause, empty streets, masked faces, online everything. It began in Wuhan, China, crossed borders, shut down airports, touched nearly every life. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, lonely, strange, transformative. We clapped for nurses, baked bread, lost loved ones, found new habits. Vaccines arrived, variants emerged, misinformation swirled. But science held the line, and so did you. This isn't just history. It's the now you've already lived. Sometimes survival itself is a story. You are now in the post-war calm of the 1950s. Radios hum, newspapers rattle, school bells ring. In 1957, a new flu strain, H2N2, emerged in East Asia. It moved quietly, then suddenly. By the end of the year, it had reached the United States, the UK, and beyond. Over 1 million people died worldwide, and yet the world didn't stop. Vaccines were developed swiftly. Public health campaigns expanded. It was one of the first tests of global flu surveillance, and it passed. Sometimes progress is measured not in numbers, but in speed, learning, and care. Hey friends, turn the calendar back to 2009. In the spring, a new H1N1 influenza strain emerged, first in Mexico, then the world. It spread fast, but it was milder than expected. Many recovered, but it still claimed lives, especially among the young and vulnerable. A pandemic was declared. Vaccines were rolled out. Debates over urgency swirled, but health systems stayed intact. Lessons from earlier pandemics helped steer the response. It ended with gratitude and a touch of humility. Sometimes, not every warning leads to catastrophe, but everyone teaches something new. Dear listener, wander with me through the deep, green Atlantic forest. From 2016 to 2018, Brazil saw a resurgence of yellow fever, especially in rural areas. It was carried by mosquitoes, preventable by vaccine, but many hadn't received it. As cases grew, cities grew anxious. Vaccination campaigns raced against the season. Monkeys, also affected, became unintended scapegoats, though they were warning signs, not causes. The outbreak passed, and coverage increased. In its wake came balance between ecology, education, and protection. Sometimes the forest speaks softly, and we must listen before it roars. Hey friends, close your eyes and drift into powdered wigs and candle-lit salons. In 1743, an influenza epidemic swept through France. They called it La Grippe. the name that would endure for flu ever after. It was swift, but not severe. Yet it disrupted parliaments, shut theaters, and paused travel. What made it memorable wasn't the death toll, but how much it reminded the Enlightenment of its fragility. Even reason, science, and poetry paused for coughs, and sometimes the body reminds the mind, you too must rest. Hey friends, take a deep breath as the city lights flicker through the window blinds. In the 1980s and 90s, amid the HIV/AIDS crisis, another old illness began to quietly return: syphilis. Once thought nearly eradicated, it reappeared in urban centers, among communities already burdened by stigma and limited health care. It begins subtly: sores, rashes, fevers. Then it hides, sometimes for years. But this wasn't just a medical resurgence, it was a social one. The disease revealed gaps in care, trust, and access. Public health campaigns followed: mobile clinics, awareness drives. Testing became a quiet revolution. And though the numbers fell again, the lesson stayed. Sometimes old ghosts return not to haunt, but to remind. Dear listener, imagine walking through a wheat field in summer. The wind rustles golden stalks, but something dark grows among the grain. Ergot, a fungus. In medieval Europe, it infected rye crops. When baked into bread, it caused hallucinations, spasms, and gangrene. Whole villages trembled, danced, cried out in visions. It was called St. Anthony's fire. People believed it divine punishment. Hospitals run by monks provided relief. Simple rye-free diets saved many. But the illness would come in cycles, tied to wet harvests and forgotten spores. Centuries later, scientists found LSD within ergot's chemistry. Strange, isn't it, that a plague could live in your bread and your dreams? You are now standing in Heian-era Japan. Paper lanterns sway gently in temple courtyards. Plum blossoms scent the air. In 995 CE, a mysterious plague swept the capital. The symptoms were vague: fever, fatigue, death. But the fear was clear. It was believed to be caused by Shiryo, restless spirits of the dead. Exorcisms were held. Priests chanted sutras. The emperor himself fled the city. We may now suspect smallpox or dysentery, but the memory lingers as one of Japan's earliest recorded epidemics. And still, shrines today carry prayers against illness, not only for the body, but for the spirit. Sometimes healing means honoring what we cannot see. Hey friends, the hum of cicadas fills the air. You're in the American Midwest during a hot, restless summer. In 1933, a sudden illness spread through St. Louis. Fever, stiff neck, confusion. It affected the elderly most, and death often followed. The cause? A virus carried by mosquitoes, St. Louis encephalitis. At first, it confused doctors, but careful fieldwork traced it to mosquito bites. Public health teams worked fast. Spraying campaigns began. The spread was halted. And out of this came one of the earliest modern examples of vector control. Sometimes all it takes is listening to the insects. You are now among marble columns and olive groves, as war drums echo faintly in the distance. In 430 BCE, Athens, under siege by Sparta, suffered another enemy, a deadly plague: fever, cough, sores. Even the great statesman Pericles succumbed. Fever, cough, sores. Even the great statesman Pericles succumbed. It spread among citizens crammed inside city walls. No one could flee. Bodies were burned. Morale crumbled. Thucydides survived and recorded every detail. Some now believe it was typhus, or typhoid, or something lost to time. What remains is not the diagnosis, but the resilience. Even in illness, the voice of history continued. Dear listener, picture a Swiss city beside the Rhine, silent under a crimson dawn. In 1349, the Black Death reached Basel. Panic, like the plague, spread fast. People called it the Red Death, due to the hue of swollen skin. The city closed its gates. Rumors took hold. Minority groups were blamed. Violence followed the fever. It was a moment where plague met prejudice, and neither left quietly. But centuries later, Basel rebuilt not just its walls, but its conscience. Sometimes plagues reveal more than biology. They show us what we choose to fear and who we choose to blame. Hey friends, walk gently now through the golden grasslands of Australia, where rabbits once dotted the horizon. In the 1950s, their numbers grew too large, so a virus was introduced, myxomatosis. It affected only rabbits, causing blindness, swelling, and swift decline. Millions died. Entire populations vanished. For agriculture, it was a solution. For ecology, a disruption. And in time, the rabbits returned, resistant, quieter, fewer. It wasn't a human plague, but it taught a human lesson. Sometimes even control has consequences. You are now standing in a school gym, fluorescent lights buzzing. A nurse holds a needle. A line of people waits. In 1976, one soldier died of a flu strain at Fort Dix. Officials feared a new pandemic. Mass vaccinations were launched nationwide. But the pandemic never came. Some recipients developed Guillain-Barré syndrome. The campaign was paused. Criticism followed. No epidemic, but plenty of reflection. The event reshaped how public health balances risk, speed, and trust. Sometimes the cure races ahead of the illness and must be reeled in gently. Hey friends, the streets of Bombay are alive with spice, song, and steam until the rats began to die. In 1896, bubonic plague returned, sweeping through dense neighborhoods, ports, and train stations. British colonial authorities enforced harsh measures: quarantine, forced inspections, displacement. Resistance grew. Tensions flared. Still, the disease spread. But so did science. The Halfkeen Institute began producing vaccines. Volunteers helped. The port city adapted. And though the disease lingered into the 20th century, a foundation was laid. For public health, for research, for resilience. Sometimes it is not the disease we remember, but the people who endured it. Dear listener, we end this part of the journey in New York City, where the skyline shines and pigeons perch above. In 1999, birds began dying. Then came reports of fevers, confusion, a few fatalities. The West Nile virus had arrived, brought perhaps by a plane, a storm, a stowaway mosquito. It spread across the continent over the next few years. Horses were infected. Cities responded with awareness, insect control, and citizen alerts. Now it remains, seasonal, known, mostly mild, but still monitored, because even now nature hums reminders in every wing beat. Hey friends, walk with me through the arid deserts of Arizona and California. The sun is bright. the ground cracked with stories. Here lives a fungus, silent in the soil. When the wind stirs, it becomes airborne. Breathed in, it causes valley fever, cough, fatigue, fever, symptoms like the common cold. But sometimes it lingers in the lungs. In rare cases, it spreads to bones or the brain. It's not contagious, just quietly persistent. Doctors have learned to detect it. Communities have grown cautious in dusty seasons. And like the desert itself, valley fever is not always seen, but it is felt. Sometimes stillness carries secrets. Dear listener, picture red silk banners blowing over tiled rooftops. A Tang Dynasty scroll unfurls in the morning light. Smallpox arrived in China centuries before vaccines, deep in the 7th century, during the golden age of poetry and porcelain. It affected children most, nobility and peasantry alike. The emperor's own sons were struck. But here, something remarkable occurred. A practice called variolation was developed, introducing a mild form of the virus to confer immunity. It spread through powdered scabs, carefully administered. Centuries ahead of Jenner's vaccine, China had already whispered toward protection. Isn't that something? Even then, wisdom traveled in careful hands. Hey friends, the city is quiet, the air warm. Cicadas drone from balcony gardens. In 2016, Singapore confirmed its first local cases of Zika virus. Unlike earlier outbreaks in Latin America, this one seemed smaller, less severe. But the city didn't wait. Fogging began. Inspections increased. Public awareness surged. Hundreds were infected. No major birth defects were reported, but the threat reshaped policy. Singapore's response became a case study. How urban centers could react fast, calmly, precisely. Sometimes success means making a storm feel like a drizzle. You are now near the Bay of Bengal. Boats sway. Fish dry in the sun. In 1961, a new strain of cholera, L. tor, emerged. Stronger, more persistent, less deadly but harder to stop. It spread from Indonesia to the Middle East, then Africa, then Europe. Unlike previous outbreaks, L. tor lingered. It colonized intestines without always causing symptoms. Silent carriers moved across borders. Eventually, new treatments, oral rehydration, and better sanitation reduced its bite. But it never truly left. Sometimes, a wave doesn't crash. It simply stays, curling softly under the surface. Hey friends, under the eucalyptus trees of Queensland, something unexpected began. In 1994, a horse trainer fell ill. Then another. Then the horses. A virus had passed from fruit bats, through horses, into humans. It was named after the suburb where it appeared, Hendra. Rare but deadly. Veterinarians studied it. A vaccine for horses followed. Public awareness grew. Though few cases emerged, Hendra remains part of Australia's quiet vigilance, where wildlife, people, and stories cross. Sometimes, new illnesses come not with a roar, but with the soft flutter of wings. Dear listener, step into a dairy farm in Spain. The scent of warm milk, hay, and afternoon sun fills the air. In the 1980s, a bacterial disease spread through unpasteurized cheese, brucellosis. It caused fever, joint pain, night sweats, treatable but persistent. Thousands were affected before the source was identified. Today, pasteurization is standard. Testing is rigorous. The cheeses remain, delicious, but safer. Sometimes, tradition needs only a gentle nudge toward safety. And the stories still taste sweet. You're now strolling the Seine, early morning mist rising over cobblestones. In the 1920s, Paris faced a typhoid outbreak linked to oysters from the coast. Restaurants closed. Shellfish was avoided. Investigations traced the bacteria to unsanitary harvest conditions. The city acted. Regulations changed. Hygiene standards rose. And so, the food capital of the world learned something new: how to blend flavor with safety. Sometimes the palate teaches the policy. Hey, friends, you've heard of this before. But let's look again, softly. In medieval towns from Aachen to Strasbourg, people danced uncontrollably. For hours. For days. Historians call it dancing mania. Some blamed ergot poisoning. Others said hysteria. Some whispered of saints or curses, but no cause has been confirmed. What we know is this: people danced, collapsed, and danced again. Maybe it was grief, or hunger, or spirit, but in those cobbled streets movement became medicine, and mystery became memory. Sometimes the body speaks what the mind cannot. Dear listener, war raged in Syria. Cities crumbled, and then polio returned. A disease nearly eradicated came back where vaccines had paused. It affected mostly children. The virus spread silently in refugee camps and broken towns. Health workers, even under fire, began emergency campaigns. Door-to-door vaccinations resumed. International aid returned. The outbreak was contained. It reminded the world that no illness is ever truly gone, if care disappears with it. Sometimes healing means showing up, even when the sky is falling. And now, dear listener, let's end not with sorrow, but success. Rinderpest, once called the cattle plague, devastated herds across Africa, Asia, and Europe for centuries. It caused famine, economic ruin, fear, but in 2011, it became only the second disease ever eradicated. How? Vaccines, trust, collaboration between farmers, scientists, governments. It took decades, but it worked. And now it is gone, completely. Sometimes the greatest triumph is the silence that follows. Closing message. Hey friends, if you've stayed with us through all 100 stories, thank you. If this journey brought you rest, wonder, or even a moment of calm, we're grateful. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe, because there are more quiet stories waiting in the shadows of time. Sleep well. Tomorrow brings a new chapter.